Oh, you know what time it is. It's time for the second Blue-White Breakdown podcast with Bob Flounders, me, and Johnny McGonigal. We recorded our first one a little over 24 hours ago, Johnny. And I think the Penn State fan base is now pretty aware of your love for the Eagles, the Phillies, and the Sixers, but especially I would say the Eagles are number one, and you've admitted that. But you were feeling pretty good, pretty stable. On our first one, you said it wouldn't get any worse. Now that we're here, it's Thursday at 1:05 p.m. Before we get to Penn State, I got to ask you, has anything changed in your world?
No, nothing has changed. Like I said, once we get to 3-4 hours before kick, that's normally when the nerves go away and the kind of just whatever that kind of energy, however you want to describe it, of like, hey, we're just going to go out and get it done. So it's normally flipped because I know a lot of people get nervous as kick approaches, but for me, the nerves are normally in the early part of the week. So, no, I'm feeling okay. I'm feeling all right. We'll see. Yeah. Again, it's like the idea of having to beat Patrick Mahomes, and the idea of like, hey, in this 5-year stretch of him playing like unbelievable at quarterback, right? And for him to only come away with one Super Bowl in like this 5-year stretch seems like it's like not quite enough. So I'm hoping that doesn't come at the Eagles' expense, but we'll see.
We shall see. We're gonna get into some Penn State stuff fairly soon. Johnny's gonna make a Super Bowl pick, but why don't we? Since we're talking about the Eagles in the Super Bowl, there's a fairly well-known ex-Penn State star that is going to play. You would think a lead role for Penn State's offense in the game. Miles Sanders, Western PA kid, 1,000-yard rusher at Penn State. It's so funny. I still think about the running back room when Saquon Barkley was there and Miles was backing him up. And Miles is such an elite talent, but he didn't really get to see the field because they had Saquon Barkley. But man, there was never any doubt about his talent in 2018. He played on a team that wasn't quite the level of the 16 and 17 teams. And he still almost ran for 1,300 yards. He's a Philadelphia Eagle. They have a great running attack. And James was asked about Miles Sanders. And I know that you have some connections having dealt with Miles, I think, and his family in the past. So what do you want to share about Miles Sanders and kind of what you've learned and kind of what his role might be Saturday?
Yeah, well, you mentioned Franklin, and we'll start there on Tuesday. He was asked about Miles Sanders being in the Super Bowl, and yet another Penn Stater representing, on the game's biggest stage. And James said that he's proud of Miles. He's always done it, done the right things, well on the field and then off the field as well. Good representation of Penn State's program, and he's really happy for him. And I do feel like that's a kind of an overlooked part of this, is that. Not of his story necessarily, but of just a part of his journey, because he came to Penn State as this 5-star prospect. He was the number 1 running back recruit in his recruiting cycle. Had offers from Alabama, Ohio State, everywhere across the country. Wanted Miles Sanders. He decides to stay home primarily because he wanted his mom at every game, and his mom matters so much to him. And I started to get the sense of that when I was talking to Marlene Sanders, his mom, going back to when he was a freshman and sophomore, and then I was working for the CDT. I did a bigger feature on him and his relationship with his mom and how his impending NFL draft decision was going to affect that. He ends up foregoing his final year of eligibility, and just staying in touch with his family throughout the years. It was good to be able to catch up with them in a couple days after the NFC Championship game. Wrote a story up. It's up on PennLive now. Talking to Miles's mom and his longtime trainer and mentor from the Pittsburgh area, just about his journey and about everything that he went through. And even recently, this is a contract year for Miles. And last year he didn't have a touchdown. He dealt with injuries, missed a bunch of games, and for him to really bear down in the offseason and get his body right, he was hell bent on that. He was a little ticked with how things were kind of panning out for him so far in his NFL career. He had good production, but not to the level that he thought he could. And so to be able to see him put it all together this year, and now he's in the Super Bowl. He scored 2 touchdowns in the NFC Championship game. And it's a really cool story. And one I was glad I was able to write and share. And so if you haven't already, go check that out.
Yeah, and let's hope for the best with Miles and his role in the game. You never know what's going to happen. I don't want to say the Eagles have an embarrassment of riches in the running game, but they have a lot of options. Gainwell is is lethal in the open field. You got to worry about the quarterback. So I think that's one of the keys to the Eagles' success this year is you really don't know what's coming in that running game because they can hurt you so many different ways. And then they have elite wide receivers and an elite offensive line and elite tight ends. So for Miles to have the year that he did, really with all that talent around him, I mean, I think that on another team, he would probably have better numbers, but I'm sure he wouldn't trade this for the world. So we'll see how it plays out for Miles Sanders on Sunday, Johnny. But let's circle back to Penn State's media availability on Tuesday this week. James Franklin was available to talk about finishing up the recruiting class. They also introduced Marques Hagans as the new wideouts coach, replacing Taylor Stubblefield. And then, the thing that I think that there was a lot of media people there, and deservedly so, but they made about, I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 24 second-year players available, the true freshmen from the 2022 season. And we got to talk to a lot of them for a lengthy amount of time. So it was really a productive day. It was really good to get to know the young players. But really, it was also good to get to know Marques a little bit. He spoke with us for about 30 minutes. And James actually went into pretty great length, I thought, about the process of hiring him, what the expectations are moving forward, not only for Marques, but the wideout room in general. So you wrote a bunch about Marques, Johnny, before we got a chance to talk to him. Having now heard from him and how he answers questions, he seems like a guy that, everyone always talks a good game when they get introduced as an assistant coach, but he does seem like the guy that Virginia was really sorry to say goodbye to because of not only what he did as a coach, but the relationships he was able to build with his players at Virginia.
For sure. And I think I might have mentioned this on a previous podcast, but whenever an assistant coach is hired, I always kind of look to see what the other fan base is talking about, how they're receiving the news of an assistant leaving their program to go to another. And sometimes people are happy to see coordinators or position coaches leave, but this wasn't the case with Virginia. And it wasn't just the fans either, though. It was the former players. It was guys from Marques Hagans' time at Virginia. He was there for 13 years, too, as a grad assistant, 11 years as their wide receivers coach. And to see the outpouring of support and the number of guys that were just happy for him, that it was like, yeah, this sucks that we're losing him from the Virginia community, because he was really a big part of not just the football program, but the community at large, him and his wife. But we're happy for him to take this next step. And I was able to talk to a handful of former Virginia wide receivers. I don't like plugging stories all that often, Bob, but two plugs in a 4-minute span, whatever that is. Go on PennLive if you haven't already read that. Give that a look. But yeah, basically the gist of it was these guys came into Virginia. None of them were necessarily the highest recruited players, but they developed under him. They became better men. They still use the lessons they learned from Marques Hagans today in their daily lives, whether that's in their work as receivers still in professional football or as fathers. So he makes impacts on these players' lives. And I really think that was a big sell, for James Franklin to bring him in. And you obviously got to develop the football player too. He's not just a teacher outside of the game. He's a teacher on the field too, and knows how to develop receivers. And I also think that relationship with Anthony Poindexter, Penn State safeties coach, a long time, Virginia guy. I think that really helps too.
Yeah, I'm sure James leaned on Anthony, and Anthony's work at Penn State has been just, the production of and the development of these safeties, really, really fun to watch. Jair Brown took it to the next level under Anthony, but also under Manny Diaz as well. But it just seems to me that as we spin this forward and we look at the wideout room going into 2023 and beyond, James, I thought, he was asked, I think, pretty early by former PennLive Greg Pickle about, I think he asked, I'm paraphrasing, the reasons that went into why he made the change. He wouldn't go into that. He didn't say it was appropriate, but he was asked several follow-up questions about Marques, his role, how he fits, what he's looking for, and what the expectations are for the wide receiver room moving forward. I feel like, I have a pretty strong opinion on what James said, but my point, I think, is though that I think whether you want to, he's in his 10th year, and I don't know that Penn State really has ever kind of solved the wide receiver position riddle consistently at Penn State. They've had two players really that have scared, I think, during his time, really scared opposing teams and opposing secondaries. One was KJ Hamler and one was Jahan Dotson. Chris Godwin, for as good as he was, Johnny, I don't think that was the player that scared defenses when he was there. It was Saquon Barkley. They also had Mike Gesicki. They had some other players. They actually had to worry about Trace McSorley. But the most terrifying receivers to play at Penn State during James Franklin's time were Hamler and obviously Jahan Dotson. And I think James wants that to be more of the norm. And I don't think he wants to go a lot of years without having that threat on the outside. He talked about it, the way the game's being played. You got to scare defenses, and you got to be able to change the game in one play. He's seen it enough with Ohio State, right? Ohio State, every year, they have guys like that. Julian Fleming can barely get on the field. So I think there was a lot that went into getting Marcus to Virginia, from Virginia to Penn State. But I do think the expectations of James and the wide receiver room, he wants that room, and he wants that coach to build some fear into opposing defenses. And I think that really factored into the change.
For sure. I mean, you look at what Parker Washington did this past season. He put up solid numbers, but I think people expected a little bit more, and not just from Parker, but from the wide receiver room as a whole. And I think that went into the reason to relieve Taylor Stubblefield of his duties is that they just weren't getting that right. You talk about the fear, right? Striking fear in the opponent. I just don't think Penn State had that over the last few years, aside from Jahan Dotson, which is that's a different case. But you look at what Marques Hagans, and I mentioned his development of receivers and the type of athlete and the type of recruit that he was getting at Virginia. They get some good guys down there, and Virginia itself is a really talent-rich state in terms of high school recruits. But for him, it was more about development. It's like, okay, we're taking some 3-star guys here, and we're putting them into the league. And so now he gets it seems like an embarrassment of riches, and not just right now, but over the next few years in terms of the type of athlete and type of player you can recruit at Penn State versus what you can recruit at Virginia. He's going to be dealing with 4-star, maybe even 5-star guys in his wide receiver room. And so that's really, I mean, that's huge. That's huge in terms of taking that talent and molding them into, like you said, the kind of fear-inducing kind of player that Penn State wants and really needs to take that next step in the Big Ten and when competing with Ohio State and Michigan. The other aspect to this is you mentioned the wide receiver coach in terms of the carousel that it's really been since Josh Gaddis left. You had Jared Parker, you had David Corley, who was hired to be a running backs coach, got moved over when they brought in Sider and again Stubblefield as for 3 years. Marques Hagans was at Virginia forever, and it was comfortable for him because he knew the university and the university knew him. But this is someone who had success over a long period of time at one place, and I think that is something that James Franklin is also after. It's like, hey, if not only can we want to up our level, but we want to do so consistently and not have this be a revolving door, and because that makes it hard on recruiting, that makes it hard on building those relationships within the wide receiver room. And so I think that's where Marques Hagans can really come in. And it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult and different for him because, again, this is not a situation that he's been comfortable in. He hasn't been at Penn State for 13 years. So it's going to be a change for him too. But I think it's going to be a good change for this wide receiver room at Penn State, not just now, because there is pressure to get production now and going into 2023, but in the years down the line as well.
Yeah. Another thing I noticed about Marcus in reading your stories about him and looking at his biography is that when he would get 3-star recruits, he would develop them, but he wouldn't just develop one of them. There were years where they were able to spread the ball around, but solid production from 2 or 3 guys. Whereas at Penn State, as you looked at the room. And they had to bring in Mitchell Tinsley this year to kind of take some of the heat off of Parker. And they're still kind of waiting on some young wideouts to emerge. But I think in a perfect world, you have a guy that could scare the crap out of opposing secondaries. But if you pay too much attention to him, there's 2 or 3 other guys on the roster at receiver that are almost as dangerous and that they can hurt you. And you add in the tight ends that Penn State has and the running backs, and then it's really gonna going to be a problem. You look at what Ohio State's been able to do. You look at what a guy like Brian Hartline, a former Buckeye, has been able to do at Ohio State. And when you got guys leaving Ohio State to go to Alabama, and then they become the first overall wideout ticket in the NFL draft. I'm talking about Jamison Williams. That's when you know you have a wide receiver room that is feared, right? They have guys that can play, and it's just a question of when their number's called. I think James wants to get closer to that, and I think this is a step he felt he had to make. Taylor was here for 3 years, so while it may have seemed sudden when he made the move, you could also make the argument that, hey, Taylor, you were here for 3 years and we're still kind of talking about this. So maybe it wasn't that sudden.
And philosophically, I don't think Penn State wants to live in the portal. You mentioned guys leaving Ohio State. That would be more of what Penn State wants to be. Like, they don't want to be living and dying by the portal every year. And they haven't been. They've gone into the portal and got guys, throughout the roster, on both sides of the ball to help them. But at the wide receiver position, to have to do it back-to-back years, bring in Mitchell Tinsley ahead of last season from Western Kentucky, and he comes in and he produced. We talked about it on yesterday's podcast. Like, he did a really nice job for himself in 1 year. But to then have to do it again and bring in a Malik McLean from Florida State, and they're waiting on Dante Cephas to come in from Kent State, when you signed 5 receivers in the 2022 recruiting class. And, look, Amari Evans had a touchdown catch from Drew Aller early in the season, but, you didn't really see the production from those guys right away, whereas you did at other positions across the board from the 2022 recruiting class. Now, you can't have all 23, 25 signees, whatever it was. You can't have all those guys come in and produce right away. But I think there was just maybe a dissatisfaction or a disappointment in just the way that receiver room had been developed, and that the fact that they feel like going into this 2023 season where expectations are high. They do have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, and you want developed receivers to be able to provide a security blanket and build a rapport with Drew Aller in his first season as a starter. To feel like you have to go in the portal to get that, and you don't have that in-house, I think is something that just doesn't sit right with James Franklin. And so he felt like he had to make a change. And I do think that's a big part of it, though. I think Penn State doesn't want to live in the portal. They want to be able to develop their own talent. They get enough talent. They get enough talent from their recruiting classes. They should be able to develop them. And that's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah, so we'll see. And you're right. It's only Marcus's first year at Penn State, and we'll see. I'll tell you what. I mean, they've added so much different talent at Penn State, and it's great that these guys, like a guy like Dante Cephas, presuming he does get here and he's going to be on the field, in September, and the Florida State kid McNeil. It's great if they get them, and they have those young players that they like. But I mean, to try and get all that together in one off season, I think is going to be very, very challenging for Marcus in his first year. I do think that more than anything, it resonated with me that he went into great detail. I'm talking about James, talking about some places, assistants are just brought in to recruit, and some places, or maybe they're just going to be the coach. That's never been, since I went at Vanderbilt, that's never been how I operated. We need to recruit the position tremendously, right? But they got to develop too. And I just think that, maybe he was getting some of what he wanted, from Stubblefield. But when he talks about it like that, it's hard not to draw a conclusion and say he felt like he wasn't getting, after 3 years, and he was the offensive recruiting coordinator, right? He wasn't getting all that he needed. And, there's no room for error in the Big Ten East. If you're talking about Michigan and Ohio State, they're both were in the playoff. There is no room for error when it comes to that stuff. You got to be great at both, or else you're never gonna be able to match up with these guys. And I think that was the position that I think he really wanted to upgrade. I think he's got his guy, and I'm really excited to see what Marcus can do. Not so much this year, but I think 2024 and 2025, when he's had some time to really kind of work his magic, in the state of Virginia, but also make some contacts throughout the state and see what he can do on the field as far as developing guys. You talked in our first podcast this week about Caden Saunders, who was one of the most coveted kids in Penn State's 2022 recruiting class. But you also said that, Caden is going to miss Stubblefield. And he said, he kind of messed up and he wasn't really ready for what was coming when he enrolled in January. But I think if you're James Franklin, I think you don't put it all on the kid. I think you got to put a little bit on the position coach. And I'm just wondering, I'm excited. He's a player I'm excited to see this year because I had heard nothing but good things about him being a potential KJ Hamler type of player. And he's a guy that when you talk about the receiver room, I don't know where he is on the pecking order right now, but I think things could change in a hurry for Caden Saunders. And I'm going to be curious to see what Hagan's impact is on a kid like Caden Saunders.
Well, I think I'm going to be writing about him this weekend, Bob. So
Hopefully I didn't ruin it for you. I'm sorry.
No. One thing, though, that you said that really stuck with me throughout that, you mentioned that there's no room for error in the Big Ten East. And I think, kind of going along with that, really, when you feel like you have a window, you have to capitalize on it. And I think James Franklin saw what this Penn State program was able to do. With Sean Clifford at quarterback, you have some limitations there. Even still, getting to 11-2, winning the Rose Bowl, you had Ohio State. It felt like for at least a little bit there in that game until the fourth quarter. So you feel good with what you accomplish in 2022, and you feel really good about what you can accomplish in 2023. And then, when the playoff opens up to 12 teams in 2024, there's a real window there. So you have 2 seasons here where you feel like you have to strike. You can get Penn State. It's always in the national conversation, right? But you can really get it into the playoff for the first time. You can get this team into the playoff here, if not 1 year, maybe 2. And if you feel like there's any deficiency, not only on the roster, because you have to go correct that through the portal and everything, if you feel like there's a deficiency or something off on the coaching staff, you just have to, you got to make a big boy move. You got to just do it. And I applaud James for that, because those decisions are really tough, because these are personal decisions. These are, coaches that they've worked with day in, day out now for 3 years in the case of Taylor Stubblefield. But you kind of have to be ruthless, especially in the Big Ten East, especially in today's college football. If you feel like you have a window, you have to try and capitalize it. You have to do everything you can to maximize what you have on the roster, what you have in that building. And I think that's what James Franklin's trying to do with this hire, not just relieving Taylor of his duties, but hiring a Marques Hagans. And we mentioned it before, but I really think Anthony Poindexter's his presence in the program, I think is going to really help Marques come in and hit the ground running and not even miss a beat.
Yeah. So I'm excited to see the wideout room. There's a couple positions that I think in this offseason, I think are going to be really fascinating to watch when you look at maybe some of the players Penn State is replacing and some of the young talent that we already got to see, and maybe them growing into larger roles. I think that's going to be really fun to see. Johnny, there's just a couple things for Penn State fans. Now that we're in February, some dates for them to keep in mind. So this past Tuesday was the first of 8 winter conditioning workouts, and then after that, that'll conclude. I think the way that their academic calendar is set up, I think the last one might wind up very early in the first week in March. There's going to be a little spring break. I think they are on target to open spring practice. I was talking to a Penn State spokesperson about that on Tuesday, a couple days before St. Patty's Day, and that's a Friday this year. So it'll be a little bit ahead of that. And I think the pro day, we heard from one of our compatriots that it might be, I think it's March 23rd or 22nd this year.
23rd sounds right.
Yeah, those are some dates I think that we'll be looking forward to see some of those guys come back, and as far as spring practice starting. So it's really, now that once you get January out of the way and you get past that second signing day, Johnny, it's real. The countdown is on to spring practice, and I know I'm excited to see it. I know you're excited to see it. Do you have any other, before we wrap this up and I get your Super Bowl pick on record, any other thoughts on any other freshmen I did it again, any other second-year players that you got a chance to talk to that really struck you?
No, I mean, I think we covered most of it on the last podcast, not to make, if listeners are listening to this and not the previous one, go back and take a listen to that, because we really dove deep into, what we learned from and what we talked to with Drew Allers, Singleton,
Yeah.
One guy I guess I mentioned on that podcast, but didn't really get into a whole lot was Zane Durant
Yeah.
and his progress that he made throughout the season. He got to play early on with Keziah Izzard missing time at the start of the season, and he really grew from there. And he ended up logging 170 snaps. Which is a good number for an interior defensive lineman as a freshman. Typically, those guys don't come in and play right away. And so I think, we've talked about him in the past, but I think he made a really nice impact for Penn State in 2022. And he's going to be trying to put on a little bit more weight to get better in the run game. And he already made an impact, getting after the passer and creating some havoc in the backfield. But in terms of holding up against a run, that's an area that he's emphasizing during these winter workouts. And you mentioned it. These winter workouts over the next couple of weeks and a few weeks is going to be really big for not only the early enrollees that just came in, but the second year guys who maybe weren't early enrolled. Maybe this is their first time going through it. And really preparing for spring camp. And spring camp puts you into a nice rhythm if you have a good spring camp, puts you into a nice rhythm into the summer and, building those habits and getting with your teammates, on campus and working out and throwing and whatever you need to do to make yourself ready for training camp, because that's where jobs are won. And that's where games are won, really, is the preparation for that season come August. And so there's big couple weeks, big few weeks and few months, really, for this Penn State program and guys like Zane Durant and Drew Aller and everyone else that we've touched on. So it's an exciting time, and I'm ready to get it going. I'm eager for spring ball to get going again, back at practice and all that. It'll be good.
Yeah, you mentioned anxious, you mentioned eager. It's a great transition as we wrap up this Blue White Breakdown podcast. If I have this right, Johnny, as one of the bigger Eagles fans I know, you are not anxious about the Chiefs-Eagles game. 6:30 on Sunday. They're playing in Arizona. You're not anxious about it. You're just eager to watch it. Is that accurate to say? And if that is the case, I think the Penn State fan base deserves a prediction. You said you're not a homer. I believe it. A prediction, a thoughtful prediction on this game.
Yeah. So look, I've gone back and forth. I've heard people say that, the Eagles might be able to just run all over this defense and win comfortably. I don't see that. This is Patrick Mahomes we're talking about. I do think the Eagles will win. The method of victory, I think, is going to be interesting, though. I think they win on a field goal, but they leave Patrick Mahomes too much time, and everyone is kind of just sitting there like, oh, God, you left this guy a minute with a timeout or whatever it is. But I think Hassan Reddick in the pass rush, that is a record-setting pass rush, this Eagles front is going to get after him in obvious passing downs late. Maybe a strip sack like a la, Brandon Graham against Brady in 2018, or maybe it's Reddick. But I think the pass rush shows up when it matters most in a high-scoring game, and the Eagles win by field goal.
Yeah, I like that. I'm no Eagles fan. As you can tell, I'm wearing a Cowboys visor. I've always been a Cowboys fan, but I have watched the Eagles play this year several times. Very impressed. I'm not buying the narrative that, don't judge. I mean, don't be careful how you judge them, because they really haven't played a really good quarterback. I think the talent, the depth, and the ways that they can win a game are very real. And I would say this, when you're talking about the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, to me, this game it will not be like the Chiefs-Niners Super Bowl, where the Chiefs were down in the fourth quarter and they had to pull it out. I think they scored 14 points late in that game. Tyreek Hill was on that team, and the Niners, the way they played, didn't have an answer for him. I think this game's going to be more like the Tampa Bay Kansas City game. The reason I say that is because I think the Eagles have the front and the scheme to get after Mahomes. And there is no Tyreek Hill in this game. If anything, I think their receiver core is pretty beat up. They do have the premier tight end, in the game, but I don't know if that receiver core really scares the Eagles. I think they're going to use that to their advantage. And I do think, if you remember the Tampa Bay game, Johnny, when they played Kansas City, Mahomes was running for his life in that game. I think the final was 38-9. They didn't score a touchdown. I don't think it'll be lopsided, but I could see the Eagles defense being really the unit that is most responsible in this. I would not surprise me if the Eagles won by 10 points in this game. I just think that their defense and the players that they have are really, really going to cause problems for Kansas City without Tyreek Hill. I just don't know. They don't have much of a running game, and I just think they're a little too as good as Mahomes is. I just don't know if he can do it. John Elway was always a guy in the Super Bowl before until the very end. He was on some Denver teams that got trampled by NFC teams. It's a little before your time. It was when they finally got a running game and some receivers that he got good. They don't have that in Kansas City. I think the Eagles are going to win by 10. How about that?
I like it. It's an interesting thought exercise, right? The best quarterback in the league against what I think most people agree is the best roster in the league. I mean, you look at what I was listening to actually a podcast on the way back from State College on Wednesday.
Yeah, you were.
And they pointed out that for media night, right? So they trot out like the best 11 players on the roster and put them up on those little mini podiums. And you see the players that are rolling out for the Eagles, not just Jalen Hurts, and we talked about Miles Sanders, but A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, all these guys, Hassan Reddick, Fletcher Cox, Lane Johnson. And then you look at the Chiefs, and it's like, they have Mahomes and they have Kelsey, but then they also have like Jerick McKinnon at the podium. Now, if Jerick McKinnon kills the Eagles on Sunday and scores 2 touchdowns and is the reason why they win, then credit to him. But I just think this roster top to bottom is just better than what the Chiefs have. And I think the pass rush is going to be able to, get after him enough. Hassan Reddick against Andrew Wiley is the matchup to watch. And I think Hassan Reddick has been playing like the defensive player of the year that no one talks about this year. And I think he does it again.
He certainly influenced the Niners game, right? He single-handedly changed that game when the Niners stupidly had George Kittle try and block him, and that just didn't go well. So I think we're on the same path. Dan Marino got to a Super Bowl once, and he got trampled by the Niners. It's great to have a generational talent at quarterback, but if you don't have enough around him, eventually a deeper team, I think, is going to figure you out. I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles figure out the Chiefs fairly early in this game. We'll see. As I'm not an Eagles fan, but I really do like their chances on Sunday. Johnny, I wish you the best of luck in your viewing plans, and I hope it goes your way, my man.
Thank you, Bob. Go Birds.